Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, Painting the Pieces. And today I'm working on a study that's going to be for a larger painting, acrylic or mixed media probably, on canvas. But I like to do studies first of smaller bits so that I can set the palette in my mind, see if that works for me, and get some idea of how the images are going to fall next to each other and whether I like that or not. And I might do several, but this is my first one. So this is, I think, 5 teapots, 4 or 5 teapots. And they're mixed together so that some handles go into another teapot and some of the decorations or the patterns of one teapot blend into another. And they have vines and flowers and things around them. You get a little better view here with the larger picture. The other one was a little close up. So I hope you can see the graphite lines so that you can see the outline a little bit. But I had thought that maybe I would start with the Zorn palette, which doesn't have any blue in it. It's reds and orange and greens and those sorts of colors. And with the watercolor set that I have, as you can see there to my left, there are quite a few oranges and quite a few greens. There's 2 reds, which you can see in the flower that I've done on the right-hand side. So there are sufficient colors, but as I started to work more and more on the painting, I just felt like I wanted a little blue, something that was not maybe just blue, but blue with a little mixture to it, so it wouldn't read completely as blue. So, long story, that I went with some turquoise. Right now, that paint that I'm using is the burnt sienna. But at any rate, so I got quite a bit of the teapots in the oranges, red, and green palettes, and then I added just one section of turquoise, and I liked it, and I thought, well, I'm going to put a few of those turquoise bits in, but they will remain the tinier part of the painting. I'm not going to turn one teapot into a gigantic turquoise teapot. Addition to this one, which I'll be working on probably in the next week or so, and hope to film it, are the teacups that go with these teapots. And I'm going to do those in a different palette. Probably more blues and greens and purples. Just because I want to see what that looks like next to this one. Now, I have done that in flower paintings that are of this type, that look sort of like puzzle pieces, where I've had colors of the flowers, and then I've had greens and darker browns at the bottom, and then light sky blue at the top. So it has worked for me. But that's really using a lot of colors, and you start to sometimes lose the idea of the palette, and things lose a sort of cohesiveness. And when that happens, then if you're like me, you're in trouble. So I try not to get to that place. But you'll see when I do the larger painting from these teapots and teacups and the other bits that I'm going to add to those, and we'll see how I do. So I'm hoping that the teacups will work in the blues, and I'll have this one, and I can just put the two things together, sort of meld the two things together. But right now, I'm really enjoying working on these little studies with the small brush in watercolor. Working in watercolor for me is just so relaxing. And I have seen a couple of YouTubes, and I've watched a couple of people work on large canvases with watercolor. And I did buy some of the Dorland watercolor medium that you can put down on a canvas, which makes the canvas react more like a nice watercolor paper, which this watercolor paper is very thick. You can see with the deckled edges and things, it's very nice. So I'd like to have a canvas that works more like that. And of course, the nice thing about having a canvas is I don't have to worry about matting it and framing it. And I don't always want my watercolors in a mat and a frame. You know, it is sort of nice to have them on a larger base that I can treat more like an acrylic or an oil painting. Either paint the sides or put them in a shadow box, floating box. That's my go-to way of framing. So I'm just continuing on with this. I'm putting in the watercolors fairly lightly just to get an idea of where I want them to go. One of the reasons for that is that I can go back over, as you would an oil painting, and glaze a different color so that I get a mixture without having to mix them separately, which I prefer. I like to see the color underneath rather than having it mixed. So I might do that with the body of that teapot to the left. That's a pretty light green. And this is just an orange, which is reading pretty red in this video. Not quite as orange as the teapot on top of it, but still an orange color rather than a red. Here it looks like the flower, that it's a red color. So just blotting some of the watercolor there. Sometimes I start to paint in an area that still has a section that's wet next to it. And you just need to blot that out, and it happens very easily with watercolors. I used to think watercolors were the most unforgiving paints, even though I liked using them. And so I went to oils first and then acrylics, which you've heard me say before. And now I've gone back to watercolors with just a real love of them and feeling that they're not that difficult, and actually sort of a preferred medium for me. So if I can figure out the Dorlands on canvas, I may be just converting to watercolors exclusively. And even though acrylics are a water-based paint, and now there's, or for quite some time, there's been a water-based oil paint, it just doesn't have the flow, at least for me. And, you know, I'm not an expert. I'm sure some people get exactly the flow that they want with them. But watercolors have just been easier for me. I'm going over these leaves with that olive green, which does tend to read as sort of a brown color. And if I put it on very heavily, then it reads more that dark green. So it's, I've talked about that before too. I just love that olive green in this Lightwish watercolor set. My plan is to try an olive green in another watercolor too, just to see what that might be like as I run low in this Lightwish set of 48. And because I used the olive so much, I think probably that will be the first one that I run out of that color. I like the idea of blocking in these various pieces too, where the vines come in. And it's one of the reasons that I like the way the vines look in a painting. Now here is a bit of turquoise, which I guess maybe you can see it a little bit more clearly on the second piece, but that first one red, kind of green. But you can see as I put in that turquoise, I just thought, well, that works for me. So I'm going to put it in some of the other places, because it's very important not just to use it in one section, but if you're using a color even a tiny bit, move it around the painting so that the painting comes together. No matter what section you happen to be looking in, your eye just reads that it's part of the whole work. I had thought too, excuse me, if the turquoise didn't work, I'd add some yellow and work it into a kind of green. But I didn't have to do that, and this is the darker turquoise. If you are familiar with the Lightwish 48 pan or larger, and they have the light turquoise and the dark turquoise, this is the darker one. But of course I'm using it with a lot of water, so it's looking sort of light. And this is one of the greens. There's quite a few greens also in this 48 set. The title of this painting you can probably see down in the lower left, and I think I don't title things this quickly usually, but I've always liked when you're doing teapots to have that British saying about being mother, being the person that's going to serve the tea. Shall I be mother? And because there are so many teapots in this painting, I thought Many Mothers was a good title for it. It had sort of an amusing bend to it as well. So for me, these colors would need to be much darker, but I'm just trying to see where I want greens and reds and orange and turquoise, and see how they're going to look before I get them too heavy in that tone. And as you know, with watercolors, you can completely take the color out. You just have to get it wet. You can use the magic sponge, which I've shown in earlier videos, or even just paper towel, and it'll take the color right back out to white. And especially using a nice paper like this where it's so thick the paper doesn't suffer at all. You could wash this under in a sink and get every single color out and be back to graphite. And if you're somebody that's a bit anxious about starting a painting and you think, oh, what if something happens and I don't like it at all? Watercolor does give you that option. So you might want to do a study, or you might want to do the base of your painting in watercolor. You can always go over it with acrylic, and then you can always go over acrylic with oil glazes if you want to. You can't change those unless you're working with an oil-based or a water-based oil. It has to be the water-based paints and then the oil-based paints. Otherwise, they will lift. But it's a fun way to experiment if you're new with any paints, or the palette isn't that familiar to you and you just want to try something. It's very nice to start with watercolors. So I'm getting near the end of the time for this video. I'm trying to keep them less than 15 minutes. This has been speeded up. This was about an hour's worth of work, not including the drawing. And I want to thank everyone for watching. I hope that you're getting something out of watching the paint and me discussing the palettes and how I work in particular. And if you are a seasoned watercolor person, feel free to give me tips below if you'd like to. I'm always appreciative of that, or I'll try to help you out. Thanks again. Have a great week.